Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, game day is within sight. It's the Red Raiders and Murray State coming up Saturday night from Jones Stadium. And our friend Chris Level had the opportunity to sit down with Tech head coach Joey McGuire. We'll discuss takeaways from that conversation dead ahead on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right.
Glad to have you along for the ride once again on Locked On Texas Tech, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and thanks to our friends at BetOnline.net for bringing you this game day weekend episode. Check out our friends at BetOnline, where the game starts, and the game truly starts coming up Saturday night from Jones Stadium. It's Tech and Murray State, and of course, as a part of the weekend ceremony here in West Texas, it's the Joey McGuire radio show, which our good friend Chris Level is the host of. And Chris, it was a conversation that, as you would expect with Joey McGuire by this point, included electricity. I don't know where brick walls are within the vicinity of any Joey McGuire conversation, but they're in danger. There are West Texans just running through brick walls left and right. I feel like whenever Coach McGuire's on the airwaves. Did you feel that?
Hard not to just feel good about where this thing's going when you're around him, man. I mean, he's just excited. This is just who he is. I mean, he gave an impassioned speech tonight to the crowd about just begging them to be there and supporting what he's been trying to put together. But I can tell that talking season is nearly over with, and they're ready to kind of get this thing going and start these games. Because I think he wants to see how tough his team is, how good his team is. And I think he feels like Murray State will give him a nice little test to open things up.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, one way or another, you are going to find out some things Saturday night whenever the Racers are on the eastern sideline there. For better or worse, I mean, sometimes you wonder if the ball game is going to be interesting, and you think, well, if it's interesting, it may be bad news for the home team. But I think that's really more of a fan perspective, because clearly from a coaching staff perspective, there's still competitions that are continuing into week one, and there are just gut checks as in when the lights come on. What's the response like? I would think for everyone involved, and that may include some of the coaching staff as well, right?
Yeah, and I think you hit on it when you say you're not real sure if the game will be like interesting or whatever, because I just go to one of the games in the Big 12 tonight. Oklahoma State was up on Central Michigan 51-15 with 14 to go in the third. Final score 58-44. So it wasn't interesting, and then it was. So
fire up, Chips.
That's right.
Got to give it to him, showing some heart tonight.
That's right. As BJ Simmons said on the old Twitters, this Oklahoma State defense is sus. So there you go. But I think you're right. I think that they want to see kind of if they know what they really know about their team. But he's just genuinely excited. I think this is a dream come true. We've talked about this, and he's now ready to kind of just see he told me that he has sent his wife and their family group text. He felt like well over 100 videos of the masked rider running out of the tunnel and everything like that, just like that he's found on YouTube, and he just watches them over and over. See, that's got to get you the hairs on your arms standing up, doesn't it?
I mean, I'm doing that this morning, and it's the same one that probably everyone watches about 1 million times, but it's good to know that the guy at the top is doing some of the same thing. And you know what? I didn't even send it out to any family members, so I'm like a bad Red Raider. Coach McGuire is dispersing it at least amongst the group text. I mean, I really understand at this point that you get to the time where you kind of feel like, all right, the energy is great and the energy was real, but it was off-season energy. And now you transition into a different kind of energy, right, where you've actually got to get on the field and prove it. And it's also not just getting on the field and proving it like you show up to the cubicle and prove that you can earn the paycheck. It's get out there and physically inflict your will upon another grown man in a violent way. I mean, I can only imagine what the guy is feeling as you're getting ready for the first weekend as the head coach.
Yeah, you got away with words, man. That's right. The violent on another grown man. That's right. And some of the other things that we got into with him, I think his relationship with Kenny Perry, who was also there, the associate head coach, and he's a running backs coach and special teams coordinator. I will tell you, he did tell me probably going to go with both kickers. You got one that's got and Trey Wolf that bombs away, but Gino Garcia also kind of the shorter guy that from a distance standpoint. So that was kind of fascinating. And they love those running backs. I think that is something that we already kind of knew, but when you hear them talk about it, the head coach and the position coach, they're really going to lean on those two. I'm talking about Taj Brooks and SaRodorick Thompson. They both told me that they would either be home video gaming or basketballing if they weren't sitting there with me tonight. But yeah, I think those guys are maybe going to be kind of the one proven commodity that you roll into the season with, that you just on offense specifically. And I think we'll see a heavy dose of those guys Saturday night.
No doubt. They were on, as I've alluded to here this week on Locked On Texas Tech, within the top two of my list of positional group rankings as it relates to just preseason confidence, because you know so much about what you're going to get out of those two guys. And you have to think, and maybe by think, I mean hope, Chris, that's going to take some pressure off of a guy in Tyler Shuck, who we know has got the potential, has got the capability, but I would imagine probably does need and could benefit from some period of reacclimation after you go down with an injury and miss the time that he did. And I can't think of anything better really in the history of football to slow down guys coming at your quarterback to decleat or decapitate him than a ground game that makes everyone just slow a step as far as what you're accounting for defensively.
Yeah, and Casey, I think that both guys, talking about the head coach and then the position coach and Coach McGuire and Coach Perry, they both mentioned that these two guys are really complete. And what I mean by that is they're really as good at blocking and doing some of that dirty work stuff as they are carrying it. And I think that's when, Kenny Perry was like, man, I automatically, when I showed up here, I became one of the best running backs coaches in the league, if not the country, just because of these two guys. But I think people forget about that. They think it's just toting the rock, but you got to be able to catch it. But it's really pass pro and some of those things that you don't think about, because at that point, I don't have to take you off the field if we're going to do certain things. We can leave you on the field. You're versatile. You can do all the things. And it was fun to hear those guys talk about how good Cameron Valdez had looked before he kind of got dinged up, and Bryson Donnelly, who's another young guy who's kind of third string right now, and even Nehemiah Martinez and Xavier White, who may get some carries and some different things back there in the backfield. But they lit up, and I tell you, Joey said something about SaRodorick that was funny because he dropped an amen, and I was like, okay, I'm perking up here. He's like, back in the spring, we really talked about playing really hard for the guy to the right of you and to the left of you, and you hear all these things. He goes, but I go through this speech to these kids, and I hear SaRodorick, who's fairly close to me, go, amen, coach. And he said, I knew at that point when he said that, I was like, okay, I've got him. He's going to play hard. He's all in with what we're trying to do. And he's been smiling ever since. And so that's the one thing SaRodorick is guilty of. He just smiles all the time, and it's not a bad thing. But I love it. And that kid's hit pay dirt 33 times, man, in his career. 33. That's pretty high on the old all-time school list. I asked him what his favorite one was, if one stuck out. He tells me about one versus Lamar. I'm like, okay, I don't even remember playing Lamar hardly, but that was the very first one, so that's why that one sticks out. But
all right, that makes sense. And we'll
yeah,
check the statistical archives, Chris, but I'm not sure you did play against Lamar, so you may not be wrong.
That's what he said. I'm like, I don't remember Lamar. Yeah,
we've all got our reasons, I suppose. It sounds like a guy that's riding for the brand. And I want to talk about some other guys that are taking to heart that very thing, riding for the brand. Next on Locked On Texas Tech. Red Raiders, it's never okay to drive stoned. If you're feeling different, you're driving different. If you've been using marijuana this fall, don't get behind the wheel unless it's one of those wheels where you buy a valve from Vanna. I can hear you asking yourself now, what's the worst that can happen? You drive below the speed limit, no big deal, right? Wrong. If you're driving high, you get a DUI or worse. Stay safe, Red Raiders. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Texas Tech. I'm Casey Cowan with Chris Level. Football season upon us. Season's greetings, friends and neighbors, as it's Texas Tech and Murray State coming up Saturday night from Jones Stadium. Just a moment ago, we were wrapping up a conversation, talking Joey McGuire, talking running backs, talking riding for the brand. Apparently not just a catchy YouTube tagline, Chris, because whether you're talking about guys like that group of running backs or a veteran defensive backfield I want to get into here in our next conversation, it sounds like we're talking about a roster. Sounds like we're talking about a locker room. Sounds like maybe we're talking about a program that is buying into whatever Joey McGuire is selling, riding the brand, or however you want to define it. I'm sensing some belief, at least early on, as we're heading into week one.
Yeah, I asked him tonight about his love for recruiting, and that's really what that is. He's not just recruiting high school players or kids from the portal. He's recruiting his own kids and players to buy into his belief. A little bit before the show started tonight, he said, "Hey, man, I just got off the phone with Matt Rule. It's one of his mentors." But everything he does is for a purpose. And I think that, again, but with Joey, it's not used car salesman feeling, like which a lot of salesmen or whatever, when you can just kind of tell, man, I don't know. It seems very genuine. And I think that's why, people and players, current and future, have just bought in, and they believe. I don't know what that's worth on the scoreboard, but I'm telling you right now, it's worth something. It's worth something when they talk about playing really hard and playing for each other and all those things, because listen to them talk about it. And there'll come a time when there's some adversity and it'll get tested. And I'm kind of fascinated to see kind of how Joey and his staff handle it and how these kids handle it when they get, on the road and it's tough, maybe in Raleigh or next week versus Houston when it's here. Heaven forbid it's Saturday night versus Murray State, but you get what I'm saying. Adversity is around the corner, and I'll be fascinated to hear how or see what they do with it. But I think, to your point, Casey, I mean, they've all bought in to his message, and it's just been kind of fun to see them get excited as much as the fans be excited.
No doubt about it. And adversity is as much a part of this game as the ball is, because every week you're going to face adversity, and the team that responds to it in the healthiest way, the most fruitful way, typically is going to have the advantage. I just think there are questions about what type of adversity and how much of it are you creating for yourself. But you can bet your bottom dollar there's going to be adversity every week. So who's going to respond to it whenever you get punched in the mouth, to quote Mike Tyson, is going to be the one that has some sort of advantage there. And as we were talking about a moment ago, Sir Roderick Thompson and buy-in from some of these athletes and some of these guys actually on the roster gives me a great opportunity to invite all of our Locked On Texas Tech listeners to check out the most recent Black Label Radio episode. Search for it anywhere you get your podcasts. Had an opportunity to visit with two of Joey McGuire's defenders, and Marquise Muddy Waters and Adrian Fry. And the thought of buy-in, I mean, it was in surplus when listening to the comments from those two guys. And particularly to me, Chris, a guy like Adrian Fry, who has spent the amount of time on campus that he has and has seen the coaching staffs, not just the head coach, but the assistants, and everyone involved with the program change to the tune that he has. When you hear the way that they talk about kind of the mental workshop that they've gone through this offseason as it relates just to the belief that you can win, the belief that you belong, and the belief that there's really nothing less than that you should expect. I mean, again, the brick wall near me was not safe when we were having those conversations, because I really did get a feel as to how it relates to not just what you're doing on the football field, but clearly how Joey McGuire would like for, I think, his players to represent themselves when they're not in his football program anymore. So you might say that I was dyed in the wool to a degree. I don't know if I'm giving a pitch now or what, but it was palpable. And I think that's something that clearly anybody wants to start with, but not every football team gets to start with whenever the first quarter begins.
Yeah, and Fry is a program guy. He's seen a lot. He's played for, multiple coordinators now and multiple head coaches, and he's been here. He's kind of grown up, I think, because there was a time when he was pretty good, and then there was a time where it's like, man, I don't know if he's the player that we thought he would be, or he hasn't maybe progressed, but I think he's still here. He's likely to be a starter. But I think it's fun to watch those kids kind of from where they've come from and just really grow up. And you hope for somebody like that it works out for him. He stays healthy and has a productive season. But that group, we talk about running backs, and we have, and that's maybe one of the strengths of your offense, because it's the one place where you don't have any questions. I would say that's the strength on that defense, and maybe the entire team, just because there's so many options back there and experienced options. And you because I think last year when I was on the sidelines in Austin, and Muddy Waters, he kind of reached out for a tackle and his arm kind of got caught behind him, and you could tell something's not right, and he goes down and Tyler Shuck goes down within 5 minutes of real time, lifetime or whatever, at the same time, and the game just kind of got sideways. It was ugly. But I would tell you, on each side of the ball, those were probably the two most important guys on either side of the ball, and Muddy is just, because I think he's an NFL guy, Casey. I think he's got a chance, if he'll have a good year and kind of make some plays and put it on film, that I think he's got a chance to be in the NFL next year. And, hopefully for those guys, they really get to wrap this thing up right, because they care about defense around here now.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. And so I think those guys are a big reason for it.
Aside from those two, you think about some of those other guys within that group. And that was part of what I asked them. Hey, I love so many of you guys from a personnel standpoint, but how often are you all going to be on the field? I mean, only time will tell, and it'll be case by case. But clearly, you think about the conversation that you might begin, as a matter of fact, with Reggie Pearson. I mean, coming off of a splash appearance there in the bowl game, and I'll tell you what, it took all of about 2 seconds within the regular season last year to see on display what we heard about him within the offseason, and that was him existing basically as a sledgehammer and cleats. I mean, the dude is physicality walking, the funeral director, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, cue the Undertaker theme, man. Yeah, I mean, ring gong, the gongs, that we listen to. Yeah, I mean that. In fact, it was funny because I asked Joey, he's like, best nickname on the team. He's like, funeral director. I mean, come on, it's easy. And he's like, I like Rabbit too. I like J Boog, for Jalen Hutchings and all that. But yeah, funeral director. You kidding me? I remember when I talked to Reggie earlier in the week, and he talked to some other media and all that stuff, and he's almost kind of timid about the funeral director, almost like, is this it? I'm like, dude, lean into it, man. lean into it, brother, because that's one of the best nicknames I've ever heard for an athlete. And he didn't give it to himself. I think maybe his dad did or somebody, but yeah. And he's kind of like, reminds me of Dwayne Slay from the standpoint of, you got to watch out for those targeting penalties. Got to watch out for the old targeting, man. Yeah, are you sweating? You wiping off your brow?
There's so much to take into account. If anybody's reminding you of the Big 12 defensive player,
I know, and I mean, be careful there, but you know what I mean.
Right. Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you mean, and it's a real part of the conversation now. How do you play defense in an intelligent way, yet still being physical and trying to make the other guy fear for his physical well-being? Not in an injury way, but they need to know that there's a price to pay for coming to this spot on the football field or trying this position on the opposing defense. That used to be a thing within football. There was physical harm that served as a deterrent for offensive players. Gather around the fireplace, kids. I'll tell you about a different time within football when it wasn't just a creative tripping contest on the run like they're trying to make it into. But what I do like, Chris, is erring on the side of physicality. And even though there'll be some of those moments where there's frustrating calls that relates to that physicality, I believe the guys in that Tech defensive backfield are erring on the side of orchestrated, controlled violence. That's the vibe I'm getting. Are you?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm watching the West Virginia Pitt game earlier, and I think there was a targeting call. They waved it off, and the announcers say something about, well, that's a win for football. But I do hope that a lot of guys back there, because money can bring it. I think Tyler Owens can bring it. We've talked about Reggie, and I hope there is a level of playmaking back there, and not just with the hard hits and all these things, but
Sure.
We've talked about that with Coach DeRuiter and the interceptions, and that's kind of where you're going to see if their scheme is working and if they're doing kind of what they want to do and confusing the quarterback and having them throw it to you a little bit. But I'm excited about that group, man, and that's certainly one of the groups. And I'm really curious to see how deep they want to go. We could talk about all these options, but when the rubber meets the road, I mean, how deep do they want to go? Because I get the sense that that's a group that really can go deep, and you're not going to see much drop off at all, and that will spill over into special teams as well. Because there's far too often around here where you've had third string wide receivers and just non-defensive players on special teams because you just didn't have the depth or the talent. And when your defense is really good and deep, it spills over into special teams, and there's a win there. So I'm hoping that we see some of that too, because those guys, and that's why Keon Blankenbaker, I mean, he's a special team stud. The kid out of Wyoming that transferred here is just a senior, so that's where we should see quite a bit of him.
Man, and you want to talk about teams that play above their talent level, or their win-loss record might reflect something above their talent level. It's a team that's great on special teams and has some of those things bleeding over into some of those hidden yardage and field position battles and big play battles, obviously, when you're talking about the return game. So I would love to see some of what you're describing there come to fruition. And you're talking about some of the depth, 5 DBs with 20 or more starts. I saw, 154 FBS starts spread out over 8 different players. They won't all get all the minutes. We'll see what kind of cream kind of rises to the top and how the rotation is sorted out. I wanted to ask you, though, before we move on, Chris, about the aforementioned Muddy Waters, because he does kind of seem like one of those flex guys that maybe can provide something within the box in a certain circumstance, but also is there in the defensive secondary as far as what he can do in coverage. How do you kind of project him maybe being utilized in Tim DeRuiter's system?
Yeah, I think that as they've kind of figured out what they've got and who's good at what, I think they like him close to the line of scrimmage a lot of the time, and and run support. He's clearly a hybrid type player, but he's not as good in coverage as maybe some of the other guys. But I think he's a lot better in short yardage and some of the run type stuff as an extra DB or safety or whatever. But you're right. There's some versatility there. He's got a big voice. When he speaks, I think people pay attention because he's so old, and I think he's such a good player. But I'm kind of fascinated to see kind of what that looks like with him, because I don't want to say he's like even close to a linebacker, but I do think that they like him up closer to the line of scrimmage more often than not. But and that may open some things up for some of the other guys, maybe in some of the third and long type scenarios too.
Yeah, and I can tell you from my conversation with him, he wants to say he's like a linebacker. That mentality, is.
He says a lot of things.
That's true. Yeah. Between the years of Muddy Waters, and he's another guy like Tyler Shuck, who's I'm sure just itching as much as anyone on the roster to get back on the field after such a limited spell in the season gone by. I hope that we're talking about a playmaking defense, whether it's turnovers, disruption, tackles for loss, quarterback sacks, any of those things cover up again for a multitude of sins otherwise as a team. So I hope that is going to be the case. Chris, we're going to let you slide on out of here, as we will be back with some parting thoughts and shots, facts and factors as it relates to Texas Tech and Murray State real quick before we're done here today. Coming up next, but we'll next visit with you, Chris, following the ball game coming up Saturday night. Want to invite our Locked On Texas Tech viewers and listeners to keep watch following game number 1, as we'll have some post-game conversation and coverage for you right here on Locked On Texas Tech on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts. So, Chris, until then, man, enjoy the week, and glad we're back to game day.
Yes, sir.
We'll visit with you soon. Coming up next, Locked On Texas Tech is rolling on. Tech and Murray State. Facts and factors to wrap up the week ahead on Locked On Texas Tech. Thanks so much for joining us on Locked On Texas Tech. I'm Casey Cowan, back for one more quick hitter as we're getting ready for Texas Tech and Murray State coming up Saturday night from Jones Stadium. Facts and factors for your viewing or listening pleasure. It is an FCS matchup on tap from the Jones this weekend. Texas Tech and Murray State of the Ohio Valley Conference. The Red Raiders since 1978, 25-1 in such matchups. 19 consecutive wins for Texas Tech going back to 1988. 12th time in 16 years the Red Raiders have faced an FCS foe. Yikes. 56-16, the average margin from 2010 to 2019 for Texas Tech over those FCS opponents. And Tech during that same time period mostly stunk. Goes to say what exactly these matchups represent. Does it not? Hoping personally that this will be one of those final few Power 5 versus football championship subdivision non-conference matchups that we have to stomach. But I know for some time, at least as a Texas Tech fan, barring some change, there will be more to stomach to come. 2023 through 2027, featuring the likes of Abilene Christian, Tarleton State, Arkansas, Pine Bluff. And what is it all for exactly? I'm not quite sure. Tougher to get good work for the coaching staff. Tougher to get good work for the team. Are fans getting the bang for their buck? Likely not. Subsidizing football championship level athletics departments? Possibly. But who is the onus actually on? Where does the responsibility lie whenever it comes to keeping some of those athletics departments fiscally solvent? Does it lie with a Power 5 football program charging their fans full ticket price to view these matchups in order to keep Tarleton State alive? Maybe you think the answer is yes, and maybe you're right. I would disagree. The day that these FCS matchups go away will not come too soon. Thankfully, it's right out the gate for the Red Raiders this time around. You get it over with, and then it's on to real fur flying. Top 25 opponents waiting for Texas Tech on the other side of this one against Murray State. Coming up after Locked On Texas Tech, we hope that you will make your second listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022. It's an 8-episode extravaganza to get you primed and ready for the NFL season. We've got local team experts at the Locked On Podcast Network, plus betting angles from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets. You're here for that action. That's where it's at. All combining into one ultimate NFL preview. So search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcast. And stay tuned. Coming up this weekend, Locked On Texas Tech will have game day coverage for you. Post-game conversation, as I mentioned, with Chris Level coming your way again on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast. So we'll see you on the other side of Game 1, Tech and Murray State, coming up Saturday night from Jones Stadium. For the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Thanks for joining us for Locked On Texas Tech.